A while back, a gentleman from Cali hit me up. He would tell me his grandfather came from the 7 luminaries in Mexico, and he would share stories with him that went back generations. These stories are amazing. He would tell of tales from ETs to giants, but his most recent one talked about duendes. If you don't know what duendes are, they're little people. And the tales of these little people run deep into Mexican folklore. And the following is what his grandfather told him about them. He would explain that there are 3 types of duendes that inhabited Earth. The first type were the largest. They were around the same height as the average 7-year-old, so 3 to maybe 4 feet. They lived near wetlands and would resemble goblins. They weren't necessarily inherently good or evil. His grandfather would explain that once in a while they would steal livestock from local farmers. Before we continue, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow. But much to the farmer's surprise, just a short time later, they would receive something. It would be a barter. These duendes would later bring back baskets full of fruit. These fruits were extremely rare, and that's how they'd know it was from the duendes. They were the only ones who were able to attain them. They would also leave things like mushrooms that grew specially in the forests, or bread and cheese that nobody else knew how to make. And really, they were okay with it because they loved the stuff. So it would more or less become commonplace among the farmers when one of their livestock would disappear, they would wait for a gift. And they would know that it was this particular duendes based on the gift. So yes, they would steal, but they would pay it back later on. And there's another interesting story that goes along with these duendes. Apparently, one of the villages that they lived near had a girl who fell in love with one of them. And shortly after falling in love with one of these green duendes, she would disappear. Her father was devastated. He would gather the entire village to go looking for her. But unfortunately, she was nowhere to be found. Assuming she had lost her life, her father would grieve for weeks. Until one day, he heard a knock at the door. It was late, so he wasn't used to receiving guests at this particular time. Curious as to who it could be, he would get up and go open the door. As he opened the door to see what was out there, his eyes would widen. Sitting in front of him would be a pile of gold, unlike anything he has ever seen. He would instantly grin, knowing what it was about. The lore states that after his daughter had joined these duendes, the one she married was the king, making her the queen. And she, along with her king, would rule over this particular duendes community. They inhabited a beautiful underground city. So after the girl from the village fell in love with this particular type of duendes and left, her father, who thought her dead, would get a pile of gold. He knew why, but he'd never see his daughter again. It is rumored that this type of little people had a vast underground city that was magical, and a population that was quite significant. The lore states that so many years after she disappeared, there was another type that started showing up to the village. They would show up to trade and barter with their particularly rare goods. This type of duendes was a little taller, pale-skinned, and they were very beautiful. It would become commonplace to spot them in the village every so often, bartering or trading goods. But for some reason, the locals would never approach them because they looked a little different, so they were afraid. But it is believed they were the queen and the king's offspring. His grandfather would also state that though these weren't necessarily malevolent beings, after the girl in the village would disappear and become their queen, they would notice a change in their behavior. Suddenly, the men of the village that were known to be womanizers or hurt children would start showing up, beaten and battered. And if they continued their ways towards their women or children, they would literally just disappear. So the lore would state that this was because of the queen. She would order their warriors to watch over the village, especially the women and children. And if you didn't do or act right towards them, you knew that your time would come. This would continue for decades. But one day, all evidence of them would just disappear. The village would never see or hear from this type of duendes ever again. And virtually nobody knew what happened to them. This brings me to the second type. The second type of duendes were about the size of a cat. These beings were usually malevolent or evil. They lived in small groups, which usually consisted of family, and they would inhabit the woods. But as always, of this evil type of little people, there was a small fraction of them that weren't. They were inherently good and one with Mother Earth, so this gave them amazing powers. His grandfather would say that they could actually control the weather. They could make it rain, snow, or make it thunder. But afterwards, they would open the sky up to a beautiful sunshine, and this would result in the most elaborate rainbows you could ever see. It's said they thoroughly enjoyed rainbows like leprechauns. The locals would never have any trouble with this good faction of leprechaun or duendes, but the bad ones, they would always have trouble with. The evil ones were known for kidnapping their children and stealing their livestock. So after these evil, cat-sized duendes would steal one of their livestock or children, the ancient natives would get angry. So they would train one of the purest breeds of dogs they had to hunt them. And once they had their scent, it was on. The dogs would eventually sniff them out, and they would capture them alive. Upon their capture, they would bring them to the local medicine man or shaman. These ancient beings were so in tune with Mother Earth that they would say a prayer to her, and the captured duendes would turn into a pile of gold. Either that, or they would turn into beautiful fruits and vegetables of much rarity. This was Mother Nature thanking them for ridding her of these evil beings. I believe these duendes to actually be leprechauns. And like any faction, they had good ones and bad ones. This brings me to the third type of duendes. This type of duendes was mostly good, but again, they had some that were bad. They were 6 to 9 inches tall and had beautiful cities in the forest. They lived like royalty. Their warriors even had wings, much like fairies, while the rest of them were just normal. These were the smallest of the duendes, and they lived in dense forest, surrounded usually by beautiful flowers. But some of them would eventually leave the forest and inhabit human homes. They would make their abode either in the basement or even in the walls of the home. These were the duendes that liked mischief. They would often tease the homeowners by stealing items that they knew they needed, causing them to think they misplaced them when they really didn't. They would get a kick out of it, but this is usually as far as the mischief went, unless you actually killed one of their people. If you kill one of theirs, it angers them, and they will come after you. Suddenly, you will start seeing dangerous things take place in the dwelling. Most of the time, the homeowner would believe it to be an accident, but in reality, it's on purpose. They will attempt to hurt both you and your loved ones, but make it look like an accident. Now, on the other hand, if you know they exist and you're cool with them, you'll be good. In fact, they will like you, and they will help you when they can. And they'll do so, you not even knowing it's them. Things like leaving money in your pocket, finding items that you may have lost, even so much as filling refrigerators. It's said if you capture one and make them your friend, you can carry them around and they'll help you. The ancient natives would allow them to inhabit their gardens, because not only would they keep the bugs out, but they would make them beautiful and keep them spotless. They could even grow fruits for you that would make you float. Hope you enjoyed. Like and follow for more interesting content.